I believe the ability to shoot a simple one-camera interview is going to be critical to your success, both as a videographer and a content creator in the coming months and years. Having started YouTube about a year ago, I was shocked to see how hard it was to actually gain any traction on the platform. While a few lucky videos got me my first bunch of subscribers, what got me here won't get me to where I want to go. Maybe you're facing some of the same issues. If you're serious about getting your message to the world, but you're just struggling with the execution part, I do think you've come to the right place. This video is going to help you. It's common knowledge that collaborations with other creators are very effective in leapfrogging yourself ahead by exposing yourself to other audiences. Just look at some content creators who have recently risen to prominence. Creators like Matt D'Avella come to mind. His skill in filmmaking allowed him to film interviews with a ton of other influential people, effectively expanding his network and influence exponentially in a relatively short period of time. Don't get me wrong, people like Matt work super freaking hard to get where they are now, and so should you. Just don't be afraid to mix a little bit of strategy into the equation. And speaking of strategy, let's talk about how you can incorporate this all-important skill of interviews into your filmmaking toolkit. So without further ado, here's everything you need to know about how to set up a one-camera interview. If you're coming into this with little to no experience in interviews, that's totally fine. We're gonna keep it simple. I am gonna talk about the cameras that I use and why I use them. But if you only have a smartphone and a little tripod to hold that smartphone available to you, then that's okay. You can start there. It's just awesome that you're actually here on YouTube learning stuff about how to add skills to your tool belt as opposed to just mindlessly entertaining yourself, which was what most people do. So good on you for being here. I'm gonna jump right now into the cameras I use. If you have no intention on buying a DSLR or a mirrorless camera in the near future, then go ahead and skip to the next part of this video, which focuses on the technique. I'm going to first talk about what is important to me in an interview camera, especially if I'm only going to be using one of them, hence the one camera setup. Keep in mind, these camera attributes are luxuries in two ways. Number one, they make my life easier, and number two, they make my interview look more cinematic and thus higher quality. Number one, reliable face detect autofocus. This feature is super helpful in the fact that if you are a one-man show and you have no one helping you, you can make sure that your subject stays in focus for the entire interview without worrying about them moving a little bit or having to use manual focus and setting your aperture super narrow such that everything's in focus. The basic premise being that when just your subject's in focus and the background's out of focus, it looks better cinematically. It isolates your subject and allows your audience to focus on them as opposed to the distracting background. Like in my office, for example, here I've got cool stuff on the walls, so I want it to be in focus, but when you're interviewing someone, you want them to be the primary focus. Number two, APS-C sensor or bigger. I like having these bigger sensors because they do allow for that depth of field effect. Again, the bigger the sensor, the easier it is to achieve the subject being in focus and the background being blurred out. When you do have this effect, it just looks more cinematic, it looks higher quality. Not everyone can do it because with the smartphones, they can't really simulate that effect yet. So it does separate your work apart. The other benefit of a larger sensor is that it's going to allow more light to hit it. Thus, when you are working in low light environments, the footage is gonna look cleaner. Number three, a native prime lens. For interviews, I would recommend a 50mm f1.8 lens. It's a fantastically versatile lens for interviews, and it's also very cheap. Typically, if you look at Canon's offering, it's like $150 or something like that, which is cheap compared to other lenses out there. Because the aperture is so wide, it just gives you that depth of field look like we've been talking about before. It looks more cinematic, and it also works really well in low light. The Canon C200 or EOS R are what I use, but they both represent very expensive offerings from the Canon ecosystem. An EOS M50 would be a great option that's far more affordable and probably a better place to start. You can even adapt that 50mm lens we were talking about earlier to it, and you're set. The way you position the camera relative to the direction your subject is looking makes a huge impact on the way the audience interacts with your film. I have three positions I routinely choose from. They probably have technical names, but I don't know the technical names, so I'm gonna make up my own names for them. You're welcome. Which of the following three I choose from totally depends on the effect that I would like to have on the audience. I use the 45-degree only for one purpose really, and that's for video podcasts. I find it to be particularly natural when you have two camera angles with one on each of the two people in the conversation. To me, it creates a less formal vibe than the just off position that I'm going to be talking about in a moment. But because this camera angle is more so used for two camera setups, I'm not going to be discussing it any further. The head-on position is useful when you want your interviewee to speak directly to your audience. The subject will typically be in the center of your frame and looking directly into the lens of the camera. This creates emotional engagement, so it's really great for anything from those inspirational, get off your ass types of messages to more intense forms of storytelling. It's also great for relationship building, which is why we use it for YouTube channels, right? So this is a head-on interview approach right now. Of course, it's in a more informal setting, but the whole idea is by doing this, we're creating a relationship. You know, you, the audience, with me, the subject. And the goal is to get subscribers, right? That's the whole reason that you do the head-on interview approach. If I was just talking off to the side and saying, oh, today we're gonna be talking about interviews, it's not going to create the same effect. One caveat is that if your subject's not very comfortable in front of the camera, it doesn't matter what kind of vision you have for your video. If they're not comfortable, I would not recommend this technique, because some people are camera shy and it's really hard for them to look into a lens and be natural. So I would highly advise the next technique if you have a subject or a collaborator like that. The just off position is my favorite for interviewing people, and it's extremely versatile. Here's how it works. First, you sit right beside your camera and tripod, and the subject's gaze is fixed on you, not the camera. In the frame, your subject will be positioned slightly off center in a direction opposite to their gaze. In other words, if they're looking to the right of the frame, position them slightly left of center. I find the just off positioning brings kind of a documentary vibe to the video, especially if you have the right B-roll to complement it. It can make your audience perceive that the subject has more expertise due to the more formal look. This shooting angle is very easy on your subject as well, as they are looking at you, a human, as opposed to the cold, soulless camera. Your audience may not connect emotionally with the subject to the same degree as in the head-on approach, but they will heed the advice coming from this person as if it's coming from an expert. Now, of course, your audience isn't a bunch of mindless drones. These are all just influences that each angle can provide. They're not a hard and fast rule, so keep that in mind. You're not going to hypnotize people by changing the camera angle a couple degrees, but yeah, you get the idea. It's all about that emotional influence that we can have on our audience. Having good audio is critical to keeping people engaged. Most argue that it's more important than the visuals. The whole goal is to optimize the distance between whatever microphone you're using and your subject's mouth. Typically, the closer the better. Here are two effective ways of getting great audio on your subject. Booming the mic is my favorite way to get audio on a subject. It does require some additional gear, so something like a boom stand is very helpful. It does allow the microphone to get as close as possible to the subject, and then you can also keep the microphone out of frame. So I'm actually using that right now. My mic is like right here, and I've got a boom pole running over there, and it works. It's super easy, especially if you're going to be interviewing multiple people in the same spot and you don't want to keep like setting up a lav mic, then it's a great option. The lavalier mic is the second option, and it's where the mic is directly on the subject, ideally hidden if possible. It's a great option, but it typically does require an external recorder, such that you sync the audio file from the recorder with your footage later in the editing software like Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro. I find it takes a little bit longer to get set up with a lav mic, but again, much less equipment. All you need is an external recorder and the microphone itself, and you are off to the races. The whole reason I'm here is to advance health through filmmaking, and the reality is I don't know enough about health to do it myself, and that's where the interviews come in. So for me, when I want to talk about something like sleep that's out of the scope of dentistry, well, I can go ahead and interview my friend Kent, the psychiatrist, who then can give us a ton of good, healthy information on what to do. And that's exactly what I did. That was the last video I produced. And the same goes for your niche when it comes to what you're trying to produce. There are going to be related topics to your niche that you don't know enough about, but that other people in your circles may. So interview them, get the information out of them and to your audience. It's going to help both you and the person you're interviewing. It's also going to help your audience. So why not? Learn the skill, master it, get it in your toolkit so that you're ready to go for the next time an opportunity presents itself. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to learn more about filmmaking or to stay healthy with me, then I would really encourage you to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell if you haven't already. like this video, and I will see you guys next time.